Log entry, Captain Arthur Vance, vessel designation Manticore. I have completely lost track of the days. The primary navigation array suffered a catastrophic burnout 3 subjective weeks ago when I was forced to navigate blindly through the Omega Nebula to avoid a localized gravity shear. I have been drifting in the absolute dark of an uncharted sector ever since. The silence out here is not peaceful, it is heavy. It presses against the reinforced hull of my ship like a physical weight. 3 hours ago, the Manticore's automated emergency protocols violently engaged, pulling me out of a restless sleep. The ship had caught a gravitational eddy from a rogue planetary body, a rogue planet drifting entirely alone in the void, completely untethered from any star. The topographical scanners identified it as a Tier 1 dead world. No thermal signature, no atmosphere to speak of, absolute biological silence. But the scanners also picked up an anomaly on the surface, a massive, towering geographical formation that did not match the natural tectonic patterns of a dead crust. I had no choice but to initiate a manual landing sequence. The Manticore is currently sitting on a vast, flat expanse of frozen black rock. I am standing outside. My heavy EVA suit is fully sealed, the internal life support softly humming against the absolute dead quiet of this world. I am looking up at the anomaly. It is not a mountain. It is a building. It is the most colossal artificial structure I have ever seen in my entire life. It is built entirely out of a seamless, light-absorbing black polymer that almost hurts the human eye to look at. The architecture is impossible. It features towering, jagged spires that reach aggressively up into the pitch-black sky, and massive vaulted archways that could easily swallow a heavy cruiser whole. It looks exactly like an ancient Gothic cathedral, but scaled up to the size of a continent. I am currently walking toward the primary entrance. The heavy magnetic locks of my boots clank loudly against the smooth black stone. The sound echoes into the massive darkness ahead of me, swallowed by the sheer volume of the empty space. There are no doors, just a gaping, terrifying maw leading into the absolute black. I ignite the heavy shoulder-mounted halogen lamp on my suit. A harsh, pale beam of white light violently cuts through the darkness. The air inside this place is thick with ancient, undisturbed dust. It swirls slowly in the beam of my light, like dirty snow. I am stepping inside the cathedral. The scale of the interior is deeply, psychologically oppressive. The ceiling is so high up that my halogen beam completely dissipates before it can hit the vault. The walls on either side of me are covered in massive, intricate carvings, frescoes. I am walking closer to the nearest wall to examine the details. They are not abstract patterns. They are incredibly detailed, agonizingly precise depictions of biological entities. But these are not the aliens who built this place. These are the things they worshipped. Or perhaps the things they feared. I am staring at a carving that is at least 50 feet tall. It depicts a towering entity with 6 massive, jagged wings. Its face is obscured by a halo of what looks like stylized frozen fire, and surrounding this towering figure are massive, interlocking wheels. Rings within rings, and every single inch of those carved rings is covered in deeply engraved, staring eyes. I know these shapes. Every human being who has ever opened the Book of Revelation knows these shapes. The Seraphim, the Ophanim, the biblical angels. But looking at them carved into the black stone of an alien tomb, millions of light years from Earth, they do not look like divine messengers of a loving God. They look like terrifying apex predators. The entities in the carvings are reaching down toward millions of smaller, all helpless alien figures. They are not lifting them up in salvation. They are harvesting them. I feel a terrible freezing dread slowly pooling in my stomach. This is not a place of worship. It is a monument to an ancient, cosmic slaughter, and I am standing right in the middle of it. Log entry resumed. I cannot stop looking at the frescoes. The sheer scale of the terror depicted on these black stone walls is paralyzing. The alien figures carved into the rock at the feet of the Seraphim are not resisting. That is the most disturbing part. Their bodies are postured in absolute, weeping submission. They are holding their appendages up toward the massive, jagged wheels of light, offering themselves entirely to the harvest. Whatever these multidimensional entities did to them, it was not a hostile planetary invasion. It was a mass psychological indoctrination. The Seraphim did not need to break their cities or burn their ships. They simply broke their minds. I forced myself to tear my eyes away from the terrifying artwork and continue walking deeper into the cathedral. The silence is so heavy it feels like a physical fluid filling my lungs. My suit's chronometer indicates I have been walking down this impossibly long, dark nave for over an hour, but the architecture never changes. It is just an endless, repeating nightmare of black polymer and staring eyes. Finally, the beam of my shoulder-mounted halogen lamp catches something different in the suffocating darkness ahead. It is a structure sitting in the exact center of the cathedral's primary apse, a massive cylindrical pillar covered entirely in deeply etched, glowing glyphs. The light emanating from the symbols is incredibly faint, a dying, sickly amber color, like the fading embers of a fire that has been burning for 1,000,000 years. It is a central data core, a terminal, the technological heart of this completely dead monument. I approach the amber pillar cautiously. The magnetic clanking of my boots feels deafeningly loud. I pull the portable decryption tether from the wrist compartment of my EVA suit and physically connect it to a hollow groove in the black stone. My suit's artificial intelligence immediately registers the data connection. The amber light pulses, a slow dying heartbeat of ancient electricity. I command the AI to begin translating the glyphs. I expected a religious text, a book of prayers, a holy testament of a dead species. But as the English translation slowly begins to scroll across the inside of my visor, my blood completely freezes in my veins. This is not a Bible. It is a biological ledger, a butcher's receipt. The text coldly describes the arrival of the entities. They descended upon this world in ships of blinding, beautiful light. They did not use conventional weapons. They broadcasted a localized telepathic frequency that flooded the alien nervous systems with pure, unbearable euphoria. It is a feeling of divine love so intense, so overwhelming, that the biological brain becomes entirely addicted to it within seconds. Millions of them drop to their knees, weeping with absolute joy, willingly walking into the light to be consumed. The Seraphim are apex predators from a higher spatial dimension, and they feed exclusively on complex neural energy, on consciousness, on what humanity has always called a soul. They thought they were being saved. They were just being digested alive. I am reading the final lines of the translation now. It details the physical aftermath of the harvest. I slowly turn my body, shining my halogen beam past the data pillar and toward the massive pit that opens up right behind it. I step to the edge and look down. It is a processing floor. It is impossibly huge, easily the size of an Earth metropolis, and it is entirely filled with millions of deep, perfectly cylindrical pits carved directly into the bedrock, and the pits are not empty. They are full of carapaces, millions of skeletal remains, but they are completely intact. There are no signs of trauma, no broken bones, no blast marks. The angels of light simply extracted their minds, stripped their nervous systems of all energy, and discarded the useless physical shells like empty wrappers. But the translation on my visor is not finished. There is a secondary clause to the ancient ledger, a terrifying footnote. The glowing green text reads, "The light takes the spirit, and the dark claims the flesh. If the Seraphim took the minds and left for the stars, what took the bodies of those who tried to hide? What is the dark?" Suddenly, the amber light of the data pillar abruptly shifts to a violent, frantic crimson red. My suit's artificial intelligence begins screaming a critical proximity warning inside my helmet. The terminal was not just an archive, it was a tripwire. And my living, breathing human DNA just triggered it. The dormant cathedral is waking up. Log entry. I made it to the airlock. The heavy titanium door of the Manticore is right in front of me. The darkness in this tunnel is absolute, but the pale emergency light above my ship's hatch is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. I am sprinting. The magnetic boots are fighting against the stone floor. The sound behind me is deafening. The scraping of heavy metal claws, the guttural, wet breathing of something that has not tasted living flesh in 1,000,000 years. It is closing the distance. I can feel the vibration of its massive weight through the soles of my boots. I crash into the airlock door. I hit the manual release lever with my heavy EVA glove. It feels like moving underwater. The hydraulic systems groan, slowly pulling the heavy metal slab open. The gap is barely wide enough, but I force myself through, violently tearing the fabric of my atmospheric suit on the doorframe. I slam my hand onto the emergency close override. The titanium door violently slides shut. Less than a second later, the impact hits. Boom. The entire Manticore violently shudders. The sound of the impact is absolutely deafening. Whatever was chasing me just slammed its massive body against the outer hull of my ship. The heavy metal of the airlock door actually bows inward for a fraction of a second. The structural integrity alarms inside the airlock start screaming in a high-pitched frenzy. I am backing away from the door, my chest heaving, desperately, pulling in the stale air of my ship. Boom. Another impact. It is violently slamming its claws against the titanium, trying to rip the door completely off its hinges. The sound is terrifying. Sounds like a massive industrial drill, violently grinding against solid steel. I stumble backward, falling through the inner airlock hatch and into the main corridor of the Manticore. I hit the secondary lockdown sequence. The inner heavy blast doors slam shut, sealing the airlock completely. The sound of the beast tearing at the outer hull is muffled now, but I can still feel the violet vibrations shaking the floor plates. I pull off my helmet and let it drop onto the floor. I am completely drenched in cold sweat. My hands are shaking so violently I can barely operate the wrist computer. I need to get us out of here. I scramble into the cockpit and drop heavily into the pilot's seat. I strap myself in and furiously type the manual launch sequence into the main console. Ignition sequence initiated. The main fusion engines roar to life beneath me. It is the most comforting sound in the universe. I grab the manual flight yoke and pull back hard. The maneuvering thrusters fire with a deafening blast, violently tearing the Manticore away from the docking ring of the massive cathedral. We are airborne. I push the main throttle all the way forward. The G-force violently presses me deep into the leather seat as the ship burns hard, breaking through the thin, dead atmosphere of Golgotha Prime. I watch the massive, pitch-black structure of the alien cathedral rapidly shrinking on the main monitor. I'm leaving that cursed place behind. I am safe, or at least, I thought I was. I engage the autopilot and lean back, finally allowing myself to breathe. But as my heart rate slowly begins to settle, I notice something completely wrong. The main navigation monitor is glitching. The standard blue topographical map of the sector is flickering violently. I tap the glass screen, thinking it is just a loose connection from the violent takeoff. But the blue lines of the map completely vanish, replaced by a dense, chaotic wave of raw data. And then, the ship's primary radio crackles to life. It is not receiving a transmission from Earth Command. It is receiving a transmission from the planet below. The massive cathedral is acting as a parabolic antenna, and it is broadcasting a signal directly at my ship. I route the incoming data through the Manticore's audio deciphering matrix. The speakers in the cockpit emit a low, vibrating hum. Sounds exactly like the massive trumpets I heard down in the processing floor. But it is not just a sound. It is a carrier wave, and hidden inside that carrier wave, there is a voice. It is not the robotic translation of my AI. It is a human voice. It sounds like an old man, his voice raspy and echoing, as if speaking through a long metallic pipe. "Captain Vance," the voice whispers from the speakers. My blood instantly turns to ice. "You have left the sanctuary, but the harvest has already been initiated. The coordinates of your homeworld have been extracted from your ship's telemetry cache during your connection to the cathedral. The Seraphim are awake, and they are extremely hungry." The transmission abruptly cuts out. The cockpit is plunged back into absolute, terrifying silence. I stare at the main navigation computer. The coordinates for Earth are locked in. But I am not the one who locked them. The navigation system is completely frozen. I cannot change the course. I cannot disengage the hyperdrive. The Manticore is calculating the jump point. I am heading straight back to Earth, and I am bringing the coordinates of the harvest directly to them. The ancient contract is going to be fulfilled in July of 2026, and I am the one delivering the invitation. Log entry: Captain Arthur Vance. The Manticore is currently in hyperspace. The transition was violently rough, shaking the ship so hard I thought the hull plates would shatter, but we made the jump. I'm staring out the main viewport at the swirling, impossible geometry of the slipstream. Normally, the shifting violet and blue light of hyperspace is a deeply comforting sight. It means you were moving fast. It means you were completely untouchable by anything in normal space-time. But right now, looking into that endless, chaotic tunnel of energy, I feel absolutely exposed. The navigation computer is still entirely locked out. The encrypted alien coordinates for Earth are permanently burned into the primary drive. I have spent the last 3 subjective hours desperately trying to physically bypass the mainframe. I ripped open the heavy metal floor panels beneath the console and tried to manually sever the data link to the hyperdrive core, just like I did on the Acheron station. But the Cathedral did not just upload a digital virus. It fundamentally altered the physical architecture of my ship's quantum processor. The microscopic silicon pathways have been completely reorganized into those terrifying, repeating circular patterns, the wheels within wheels, the ophanum. It is scientifically impossible, but the physical hardware itself has been rewritten by a simple radio transmission. I cannot cut the wires, because the wires are no longer human technology. I cannot stop the ship. I am sitting in the absolute cold silence of the cockpit, desperately trying to process the horrifying scale of what is actually happening. The Seraphim, the angels of light. The ancient Aramaic text on the data pillars specifically said they were apex predators from a higher spatial dimension. I keep frantically thinking about that specific phrase. Higher spatial dimension. Humanity has only ever accessed one single dimension outside of normal space-time. We call it hyperspace. We use it as a convenient mathematical shortcut to completely bypass the physical limitations of the speed of light. We violently tear a hole in reality, dive into the slipstream, and simply pop back out at our destination. We have been doing this for over 2 centuries. We thought it was just an empty, chaotic ocean of exotic matter and lethal radiation, a dead physical phenomenon. But what if it is not empty? What if hyperspace is not a dead physical phenomenon at all? What if it is an active, living ecosystem, their ecosystem? By engaging the hyperdrive to escape Golgotha Prime, I did not run away from them. I drove my ship directly into their home territory. I am swimming in their deep ocean, completely blind, dragging a massive, bleeding lure straight back to Earth. The ambient temperature in the pressurized cabin is dropping rapidly. The life support systems indicate they are fully functional, but the cold feels entirely unnatural. It feels deeply localized, like it is slowly bleeding directly through the reinforced titanium walls of the hull. I stand up and slowly walk toward the viewport. I reach out and press my bare hand against the thick, reinforced glass. It is absolutely freezing. The swirling violet energy of the slipstream outside the windows seems to be strangely slowing down. It is no longer a chaotic, blinding blur of light rushing past the ship. The raw energy is deliberately forming geometric shapes. Massive, impossible, shifting shapes, moving silently alongside the Manticore. I can clearly see the faint, glowing outline of towering, jagged wings, hundreds of miles long, gracefully sweeping through the violent violet light. They are perfectly pacing my ship. They are escorting me. I rush frantically back to the communication console and manually route the external hull sensors through the internal audio matrix. I need to know if I am simply hallucinating from the sheer exhaustion and profound trauma. I push the heavy physical fader up. The tiny cockpit is instantly filled with a sound that physically makes my teeth ache. It is the deafening, vibrating hum of massive apocalyptic trumpets. The exact same terrifying sound I heard echoing down in the processing floor of the Cathedral. But this time, it is not a dead recording. It is live. It is directly outside the ship. It is absolutely everywhere. The Seraphim are here. They are swimming in the slipstream right outside my window, and they are whispering in that dead, ancient Earth language again. But they are not talking to me. They are talking to each other. They are preparing for the grand harvest, and I am entirely powerless to stop the countdown. I am just a helpless, terrified passenger on a funeral ship, leading the reapers straight to the cradle of humanity. Log entry: Arthur Vance. I do not know how much time has passed inside the slipstream. Time does not function normally when you are swimming in the deep ocean with gods. I am still trapped in the cockpit of the Manticore. The massive, impossible outlines of the Seraphim are still gliding silently alongside my hull, their jagged wings cutting through the violet energy of hyperspace. But something else is happening. Something deeply insidious. The ambient temperature in the cabin is still freezing, but I no longer feel cold. In fact, I feel incredibly warm. A strange, heavy comfort is slowly starting to pool in the center of my chest. It is a feeling of absolute, profound peace. I look at my hands. They have stopped shaking. The paralyzing, suffocating terror that has been gripping my heart since I landed on Golgotha Prime is just evaporating. It is being replaced by a deep, beautiful sense of belonging. I catch myself staring out the viewport, looking at the towering silhouettes of the predators, and my mind is whispering that they are beautiful, that they are here to take my pain away. I violently slap my own face, hard. The sharp sting of physical pain momentarily shatters the creeping bliss. I stumble backward away from the glass, my breathing ragged and desperate. It is the hunting mechanism. The ancient Aramaic translation on the cathedral's data pillar described this exact phenomenon. The Seraphim do not use physical force to harvest their prey. They broadcast a telepathic frequency of pure, unbearable euphoria. They overload the biological brain with so much synthetic dopamine and serotonin that the victim willingly surrenders. They weaponize divine love, and because we are traveling alongside them in the compressed reality of hyperspace, their passive hunting aura is bleeding directly through the titanium hull of my ship. It is soaking into my nervous system like a slow-acting anesthetic. If I let the euphoria take over, I will just sit down in my pilot's seat, close my eyes, and peacefully wait for them to crack my skull open and drink my consciousness the moment we drop out of hyperspace over Earth. I cannot let that happen. I have to stay angry. I have to stay terrified. Fear is the only thing currently keeping me human. I need a constant physical anchor to fight the telepathic static. I grab the heavy industrial plasma torch from my tool belt. I do not ignite the cutting flame. Instead, I grip the jagged, exposed metal edge of the cooling vent on the side of the tool. I squeeze it in my bare hand until the sharp metal physically cuts into my palm. The sudden hot spike of pain shoots up my arm, instantly clearing the synthetic fog from my brain. The terrifying reality of my situation violently snaps back into focus. The Manticore is a hijacked missile aimed directly at the Earth colonies, and I am the guidance system. Ship's primary navigation console is completely corrupted by the alien fractal code. I cannot alter the trajectory, and I cannot drop the ship out of the slipstream. But there is one piece of technology on this vessel that is not wired into the main quantum processor, the analog emergency distress buoy. It is a primitive, heavy iron cylinder loaded into a pneumatic tube in the lower airlock. It operates on basic chemical propulsion and simple radio waves, completely isolated from the ship's corrupted digital network. If I can manually program the buoy with a warning message and physically launch it out of the ship right before we transition back into normal spacetime, it will drop out of the slipstream ahead of us. It will broadcast the truth to the Earth defense grid. They will not have time to evacuate, but they might have time to power up the planetary plasma shields. They might be able to shoot the Manticore down before the Seraphim can use my ship to breach the atmosphere. I have to condemn myself to death to save the colonies. I wrap a piece of heavy medical tape tightly around my bleeding hand to keep the pain sharp and constant. I am leaving the cockpit. I have to climb down into the lower engineering deck to reach the manual launch tube. The alien euphoria is constantly pushing against the edges of my mind, a heavy, suffocating blanket of false love trying to pull me under. I have to keep moving. I have to keep bleeding. End of current log. Log entry resumed. Captain Arthur Vance. I have left the cockpit. I am currently climbing down the narrow vertical access ladder that connects the primary command deck to the lower engineering bay and the primary airlock. The descent is excruciating. The heavy medical tape I wrapped around my left hand is already completely soaked through. The physical pain from the jagged cut is intense, sending sharp, burning spikes up my arm every time I grip the metal rungs of the ladder, but it is working. The stinging agony is keeping the suffocating telepathic euphoria of the Seraphim at bay. I can still feel their massive, impossible presence bleeding through the hull of the ship, a heavy blanket of synthetic, divine love constantly pressing against my mind, begging me to just let go and sleep. But the pain keeps me awake. It keeps me human. I reach the bottom of the ladder and step onto the grated floor of the lower deck. It is almost completely dark down here. The Manticore's corrupted quantum processor has violently rerouted almost all auxiliary power to the hyperdrive core to sustain our horrific trajectory toward Earth. Only the pale, sickly red emergency strips along the floorboards are still functioning, casting long, bloody shadows across the heavy titanium bulkheads. The air is freezing, much colder than the cockpit, and my breath is forming thick, white clouds in the dim red light. I move quickly down the narrow corridor, keeping my right hand firmly pressed against the cold metal wall for physical balance. I reach the secondary airlock staging area. The manual distress buoy is housed in a heavy, reinforced pneumatic tube, bolted directly to the outer hull. It is a beautiful, archaic piece of machinery. No digital interface, no quantum linking. Just a solid iron cylinder packed with chemical propellant and a basic analog radio transmitter. I pull the heavy physical release lever. The thick metal casing slides open with a loud mechanical hiss. I pull out the manual programming keyboard attached to the buoy by a thick rubber cord. My bloody, trembling fingers furiously punch the keys. It is a primitive text-only interface. I type the warning as fast as I can. To Earth Defense Command. This is the salvage vessel Manticore. Do not attempt rescue. Do not attempt communication. My ship has been compromised by a hostile, multidimensional contagion. We are dropping out of hyperspace on a direct collision course with the orbital grid. You must immediately raise the planetary plasma shields and destroy my vessel, the absolute second I transition back into normal spacetime. If you let this ship breach the atmosphere, humanity will be entirely consumed. Fire on sight. May God have mercy on us. I hit the mechanical save button and violently shoved the heavy iron buoy to the pneumatic launch tube. I reach for the heavy red firing handle. If I pull this, the buoy will be violently ejected from the ship, dropping out of the slipstream to broadcast its terrible warning. But right before my fingers touch the handle, I freeze. I stop breathing. The deafening, vibrating hum of the Seraphim outside the ship is suddenly drowned out by a different sound. It is a sound coming from directly inside the Manticore. It is coming from the primary airlock chamber, located exactly 20 feet behind me, down the dark, red-lit corridor. It is the heavy metallic scraping of multi-jointed claws, slowly dragging across the titanium floor plates. The dark, the physical hounds of the Cathedral. When it violently slammed against the outer doors of my airlock back on Golgotha Prime, it was not just trying to break in, it was attaching itself. It breached the outer hull right before I engaged the hyperdrive, and now, as the ship's internal bulkheads shift under the extreme pressure of the slipstream, it has finally squeezed its way inside. The temperature in the corridor plummets. I can smell it, that terrifying, suffocating stench of ancient copper, burning ozone and rotting meat. I slowly turn my head, staring down the dark, bloody red hallway. I cannot see it in the shadows, but I can hear its heavy, wet breathing. It knows exactly where I am. And I am entirely trapped between the hungry gods outside and the blind butcher inside. Log entry, Arthur Vance. The heavy metallic scraping at the other end of the dark corridor is getting louder. The dark. The physical hound of the Cathedral has breached the outer airlock and is currently tearing at the inner blast doors of my ship. It is only 20 feet away from me. I am standing completely frozen in the dim red light of the secondary staging area, my hand hovering inches above the heavy launch handle for the distress buoy. I know that if I pull this lever, the pneumatic tube will fire with the explosive force of a small cannon. The deafening noise will instantly give away my exact position in the dark. But if I do not launch the buoy right now, Earth Defense Command will have absolutely no warning when the Manticore drops out of hyperspace carrying the Seraphim. Millions of people will simply walk into the blinding light to be consumed. I tightly grip the heavy iron handle. I close my eyes, brace my boots against the grated floor, and pull it down with absolutely everything I have. The pneumatic launch tube violently detonates. The sheer explosive force of the chemical propellant shakes the entire lower deck. A deafening mechanical boom echoes down the narrow corridor as the heavy iron cylinder is violently ejected from the ship, punching straight through the slipstream to drop back into normal space-time. The warning has been sent, but the deafening noise of the launch instantly triggers a terrifying reaction from the other end of the hallway. The beast stops scraping at the blast doors. For one horrifying second, there is absolute dead silence in the Manticore, and then the inner titanium doors violently buckle inward with a sickening crunch. The impact is so massive it physically warps the heavy metal frame. It knows I am here. It smelled the explosive propellant, and it felt the sudden spike of absolute terror radiating from my brain. I do not wait to see what crawls out of that airlock. I spin around and sprint in the opposite direction, plunging deeper into the labyrinth of the lower engineering bays. I am completely abandoning the primary corridors. I violently throw open the heavy steel hatch leading down into the Manticore's subdeck maintenance crawl spaces. It is a suffocatingly tight network of narrow ventilation shafts, coolant pipes, and heavy electrical conduits that run directly beneath the floorboards of the ship. I desperately force my body into the narrow opening, violently tearing the thick fabric of my EVA suit on the exposed metal grates. I pull the heavy hatch shut right over my head and lock the manual deadbolt from the inside, just as the inner airlock doors at the end of the corridor finally give way with an agonizing screech of tearing titanium. It is inside my ship. I'm lying flat on my stomach in the pitch-black maintenance shaft, surrounded by freezing, dripping coolant pipes. I can hear it walking on the metal floor plates directly above my head. Clank, clank. The sound is impossibly heavy. It does not walk like a biological animal. It moves with a terrifying rhythmic precision, like a massive piece of industrial machinery dragging itself through the dark. The stench bleeding through the ventilation grates is unbearable. It smells a slaughterhouse, mixed with burning electrical wire. I am pressing my hand tightly over the mouthpiece of my helmet, desperately trying to silence my own ragged, panicked breathing. I can hear the massive creature systematically destroying the lower deck. It is violently ripping open storage lockers, tearing apart heavy metal bulkheads with horrifying ease. It is hunting me. But as I lie here in the freezing dark, listening to the beast tear my ship apart, I realize something even more terrifying. The heavy, telepathic euphoria of the Seraphim outside the hull is suddenly getting stronger. The angels are actively pushing their synthetic love into my brain, trying to calm me down. They are trying to sedate me, making my mind a bright, glowing beacon of peace, so the hound can easily find me in the dark. They are working together. The angels sedate the prey, and the dark executes it. I had to find a way to mask my neural signature before the beast rips the floorboards completely open. Log entry resumed. I am trapped inside the narrow maintenance shaft beneath the lower engineering deck. The heavy rhythmic clanking of the beast is directly above me now. It is systematically tearing up the floor plates, searching for the terrified human consciousness it smelled in the airlock. The telepathic euphoria from the Seraphim outside the ship is becoming unbearable. It is a heavy, crushing wave of synthetic bliss, forcefully trying to rewrite my brain chemistry. They want me to stop fighting. They want me to feel safe, so I will simply close my eyes and let the hound tear me apart. My terrified breathing is starting to slow down. Out of an unnatural-induced calm, I have to physically mask my neural signature right now, or I am going to die smiling in this dark metal coffin. I am staring at the thick frosted pipe running parallel to my body in the cramped crawl space. It is the primary liquid coolant line for the auxiliary generator. The chemical inside is kept just above absolute zero. If I can lower my core body temperature to the absolute brink of clinical hypothermia, my biological heart rate will plummet. The electrical synapses in my brain will physically slow down to a crawl. I will become a piece of cold, dead meat. The beast hunts by sensing active, frantic neural energy. If I freeze myself almost to death, I might just become entirely invisible to it. It is an act of absolute desperation, and it might kill me faster than the creature will, but I have absolutely no other choice left. I reach down to my heavy utility belt, my fingers completely numb. I unhook the heavy titanium wrench. I have to press the heavy metal head directly against the pressurized release valve of the coolant pipe and violently force it open. I take one last deep breath of the stale air inside my helmet. I push the wrench hard. The pressurized valve cracks with a deafening hiss. A thick, violent spray of supercooled chemical gas instantly erupts into the narrow shaft. It hits my heavy EVA suit, completely frosting the external fabric, but the suit is severely torn from when I squeezed into the tunnel. The freezing gas violently bleeds directly through the ripped fabric and touches my bare skin. The pain is indescribable. It feels like millions of tiny, burning needles are being violently hammered directly into my nervous system. I bite down on my own tongue to stop myself from screaming. The metallic taste of warm blood fills my mouth, a sickening contrast to the freezing chemical air I'm desperately trying not to inhale. My body violently goes into severe physiological shock. I can feel my heart physically stuttering inside my chest, struggling to pump the rapidly thickening blood. The overwhelming telepathic euphoria of the Seraphim is instantly shattered by the sheer, primal agony of my freezing cells. My vision narrows down to a tiny, dark tunnel. My neural signature is fading into the cold. Suddenly, the heavy floor plate directly above my head is violently ripped away. A shower of sparks rains down, bouncing off my frosted visor. The dark is standing right above me. I am staring up through the hole in the ceiling, entirely paralyzed by the extreme cold. I cannot see its full body in the dim red light, but I can see its horrifying head. It is a massive block of jagged black biological armor, completely devoid of any eyes. It slowly lowers its heavy head down into the maintenance shaft, stopping mere inches from my frozen visor. The stench of rotting meat and ozone is suffocating. It is searching for the frantic electrical pulse of a human soul. My heart is barely beating once every 10 seconds. I am staring directly into the face of the cosmic butcher, unable to blink, waiting for it to realize I am alive. Log entry resumed. I am dead. I have to be dead. The massive eyeless head of the hound is hovering mere inches above my frosted visor. A thick string of black acidic saliva drips from its jagged mandibles, splashing violently onto the glass right between my eyes. The chemical burns instantly, etching a deep scar into the reinforced polymer of my helmet. The stench bleeding through the compromised seals of my EVA suit is absolutely paralyzing. But I cannot move. I cannot even shiver. The supercooled liquid gas has dropped my core temperature so drastically that my biological functions have almost completely ceased. My heart is beating once every 15 seconds. The electrical synapses in my brain are barely firing, just enough to register the sheer, unadulterated terror of the moment. The beast slowly lowers its massive head, pressing its cold, metallic snout directly against the cracked glass of my visor. It is violently inhaling. It is trying to smell the fear, to taste the frantic spike of adrenaline that always precedes the kill. But there is no spike. I am a ghost, a frozen piece of meat hidden inside a broken metal shell. For what feels like an absolute eternity, the creature just stays there, breathing its rotting breath over my paralyzed body. And then, slowly, the heavy, telepathic euphoria of the Seraphim outside the ship begins to shift. The massive entities swimming in the slipstream realize the hound has lost the scent. The synthetic wave of divine love retracts, replaced by a cold, calculating static. The beast above me lets out a low, frustrated, mechanical growl. It violently snaps its massive jaws in the empty air, then slowly pulls its heavy head out of the maintenance shaft. I listen to the terrifying, rhythmic clanking of its multi-jointed limbs as it drags itself away from my hiding spot, moving deeper into the bowels of the lower engineering deck. It is gone. But I am still dying. The hypothermia is no longer a tactical advantage. It is a fatal countdown. If I do not raise my core temperature in the next 3 minutes, my internal organs will systematically shut down, and I will never wake up. I have to force my frozen muscles to move. It is the hardest physical thing I have ever done in my entire life. I painfully drag my violently shaking hand toward the manual thermal override switch on my chest plate. My fingers are completely numb, slipping uselessly against the heavy plastic dial. I violently slam my heavy fist against my own chest. The impact forces the dial to click over to emergency maximum heat. The suit's internal microheaters instantly ignite. A wave of intense burning heat violently floods the inside of the suit. It feels like I am being lowered directly into a boiling vat of liquid fire. The sudden temperature shift is pure agony. As my frozen blood rapidly thaws and begins to frantically circulate, I violently gasp for air, choking on the stale, metallic oxygen inside my helmet. I am shivering so violently that my heavy boots are loudly rattling against the metal pipes of the narrow crawl space. I desperately push myself up, painfully crawling out of the narrow shaft and back onto the ruined floor plates of the corridor. The lower deck is completely devastated. Heavy bulkheads are torn open. Thick power cables are hanging from the ceiling, violently sparking in the dim red emergency light. But I am alive. I painfully drag myself toward the primary life support terminal mounted on the wall. The digital screen is heavily cracked, but still barely functioning. The Manticore is exactly 22 minutes away from dropping out of hyperspace. The Earth defense grid has my warning buoy, but I cannot just sit here and blindly hope they shoot me down in time. I have a physical, multi-dimensional predator actively hunting inside my ship, and a fleet of cosmic reapers waiting just outside the titanium hull. I am not going to passively wait for Earth Command to fix this. If I can reach the central hyperdrive core, I can manually bypass the locked navigation computer and intentionally overload the primary containment field. I will detonate the Manticore while we are still physically trapped inside the slipstream. I will burn the Cathedral's hounds in the deep ocean. Log entry: Arthur Vance. I have dragged myself out of the ruined corridors and reached the heavy blast doors of the primary engineering bay. The physical damage down here is catastrophic. Thick bundles of fiber optic cables have been violently ripped from the ceiling, hanging down like bleeding veins, sparking wildly in the dim red emergency light. But the structural damage is not the most terrifying thing. It is what the Cathedral's broadcast has done to the architecture of the Manticore. As I force the warped titanium doors open with my pry bar, I can see the central hyperdrive core. It is no longer a human machine. The massive, cylindrical containment field has been completely reshaped. The sterile titanium plating has violently twisted itself into jagged, overlapping scales of black polymer. The entire room is pulsating with a sickly amber light, identical to the glowing data pillar I found in the alien tomb. The ship is physically transforming into their ancient technology. I stumble into the cavernous bay, leaning heavily against the railing of the elevated catwalk. The sheer amount of raw energy radiating from the corrupted hyperdrive core is staggering. The air in the room is impossibly hot, violently contrasting with the freezing hypothermia I just subjected my body to. Every single monitor in the bay is flashing with chaotic, scrolling Aramaic text. The Seraphim are using the core to anchor themselves to the ship, maintaining the slipstream bubble carrying us toward Earth. To stop them, I cannot simply push a button. The digital interface is completely locked out by the multi-dimensional contagion. I have to physically break the magnetic containment field. I have to cause a catastrophic, unrecoverable chain reaction. I pull myself along the catwalk, heading for the manual pressure valves at the base of the reactor. I have to individually shatter the 4 primary coolant regulators. Without the liquid nitrogen, the fusion reaction inside the hyperdrive will instantly spike beyond critical mass. The explosion will be absolute. It will vaporize the Manticore, the hound hunting me, and the massive entities swimming outside the hull. We will all be reduced to highly radioactive cosmic dust, permanently scattered across hyperspace. It is a one-way trip, but it is the only way to ensure the contagion never reaches the colonies. I reach the first heavy iron valve. I grip the metal wheel with both hands, my muscles screaming in absolute agony from the temperature whiplash. The valve is frozen shut, covered in synthetic black frost. I violently slam my heavy EVA boot against the iron spokes. The metal groans, and the wheel gives way with a deafening, pressurized screech. A massive jet of supercooled white gas erupts from the broken seal, instantly filling the lower level with a thick, blinding chemical fog. 1 down, 3 to go. But the sudden release of the coolant instantly triggers a massive reaction from the Seraphim. The deafening hum of the apocalyptic trumpets outside suddenly shifts into a high-pitched shriek of pure, technological rage. They know exactly what I am trying to do. They can feel their anchor slipping. The telepathic euphoria they were pushing into my brain is instantly replaced by a wave of crushing psychic agony. It feels like rusted knives being violently driven into my frontal lobe. I collapse onto the metal grating, clutching my helmet as my nose begins to bleed profusely. And through the blinding pain and the thick white fog, I hear it, the heavy metallic clanking of the blind hound. It has found the open doors of the engineering bay. It is stepping into the fog. Log entry resumed. I am crawling blindly across the grated metal floor of the primary engineering bay. The thick, supercooled chemical fog released from the first shattered coolant valve has completely swallowed the lower level. Visibility is absolutely zero. I cannot see my own heavy EVA gloves when I hold them up to my cracked visor. The psychic agony radiating from the Seraphim outside the ship is a continuous, deafening roar inside my skull. They are desperately trying to physically paralyze my motor functions through sheer neurological trauma, but the primal adrenaline of being hunted by the beast is forcing my limbs to keep moving. I can hear the heavy rhythmic clanking of the Dark's multi-jointed legs echoing through the dense white vapor. It is moving slowly, systematically sweeping the cavernous room. It knows exactly what I am doing, and it knows I am severely injured. I reach the heavy concrete housing of the second coolant regulator. I pull myself up, leaning heavily against the freezing iron pipes. My hands are completely slick with my own blood, making it nearly impossible to grip the heavy titanium wrench. I raise the tool high above my head and violently bring it down against the iron wheel of the valve. The metal shatters with a deafening, echoing crack. A second massive jet of white gas violently erupts into the suffocating room. The sudden noise is a massive beacon. Instantly, the terrifying mechanical clicking of the hound shifts into a rapid, aggressive sprint. It is charging directly at the sound of the broken valve. I throw myself backward off the elevated platform, completely blind, plummeting several feet down into the tangled mess of massive power conduits beneath the main floor. I hit the solid titanium deck hard, the breath violently knocked out of my burning lungs. I hear the massive beast crash into the concrete housing right where I was standing a fraction of a second ago. The sheer physical weight of the creature violently shakes the entire engineering bay. It lets out a terrifying bitteral roar of absolute biological frustration, tearing the broken iron pipes entirely out of the wall. 2 valves down, 2 more to go. The hyperdrive core in the center of the room is beginning to aggressively destabilize. The sickly amber light pulsating from the corrupted containment field is growing violently bright, piercing through the dense chemical fog like a dying, unnatural sun. The ambient gravity inside the room is starting to violently fluctuate. Massive, catastrophic buildup of uncontrolled fusion energy is literally beginning to tear small, localized holes in the physical space-time of the engineering bay. Loose tools, broken metal plating, and droplets of my own blood are slowly floating upward into the mist. I force my violently trembling body to stand up. I have to reach the third regulator on the far side of the central reactor core. I am moving through the zero-gravity pockets, pulling myself along the thick bundles of hanging fiber-optic cables. The psychic shrieking of the Seraphim is reaching a devastating crescendo. They are no longer just broadcasting pain. They are forcefully projecting horrifying, hyper-realistic hallucinations directly into my auditory cortex. I hear the panicked, screaming voices of the Earth colonists. I hear the deafening sirens of the planetary defense grid violently failing. I hear the horrific, wet sound of millions of human minds being violently extracted. They are trying to psychologically break me, showing me the inevitable future if I fail to destroy the Manticore. I finally reach the catwalk directly adjacent to the third coolant valve, but as I pull myself over the heavy metal railing, the thick white fog suddenly parts. The Dark is standing directly in front of the regulator. It did not blindly search the room. It mathematically deduced my next logical target and waited for me in the absolute mist. It is terrifyingly huge, a towering amalgamation of jagged black polymer armor and heavy muscle. It slowly lowers its massive eyeless head, the jagged mandibles clicking with terrifying anticipation. I am completely out of physical space to run. The beast lunges forward, its massive claws violently tearing through the heavy metal of the catwalk, aiming directly for my chest. Log entry resumed. The massive, eyeless head of the dark lunges toward my chest. I have absolutely nowhere to run. In a fraction of a second of pure instinct, I unclip the industrial plasma torch from my belt, ignite the blinding blue blade, and violently thrust it directly upward into the creature's open mandibles. The hyperheated plasma bites incredibly deep into the soft, unarmored tissue of its inner throat. The beast recoils with a deafening, mechanical shriek of absolute agony, violently throwing its massive head backward. The sheer kinetic force of its thrashing body slams into the reinforced metal railing, completely tearing the thick steel beams out of the floor. The catwalk violently shakes, throwing me down onto my knees, but the path to the third coolant regulator is finally clear. I desperately crawl forward, sliding on the blood-slicked rating, and violently smash the wrench down onto the iron wheel of the third valve. It shatters with a terrifying crack. A massive jet of supercooled liquid nitrogen erupts into the fog. The loss of 3 primary coolant lines pushes the core past the point of no return. The sickly amber light pulsating from the containment field abruptly shifts into a searing white, the architecture of the engineering bays tearing itself apart. The Cathedral's alien contagion cannot sustain the raw power of a destabilized fusion reactor. Localized gravity wells are violently ripping metal bulkheads right off the walls, pulling them into the swirling vortex of blinding light in the center of the room. The telepathic screaming of the Seraphim outside the ship reaches a level of sheer psychic devastation. They are experiencing genuine primal terror. The slipstream bubble carrying the Manticore is violently collapsing. Through the deafening roar of the overloading reactor, I can actually see the massive, jagged shadows of their impossible wings, twisting and tearing in the void outside the viewport. The hyperspace tunnel is actively crushing them. Without the stable trajectory of my ship to guide them through the chaotic ocean of exotic matter, the multi-dimensional pressure is physically tearing the angels of light apart. Their synthetic euphoria is completely gone, replaced entirely by the horrific, vibrating sound of their apocalyptic trumpets, violently dying in the dark. They are burning with me. The ambient temperature in the engineering bay has reached lethal levels. The internal warning sirens of my damaged suit have completely flatlined. I cannot feel my legs anymore. I am lying flat on the vibrating metal grating, completely bathed in the searing, blinding white light of the dying sun I have created inside my ship. The massive hound is nowhere to be seen, likely crushed by the shifting gravity or vaporized by the sheer heat of the core. It does not matter. The main navigation computer is dead. The corrupted trajectory to the Earth colonies has been permanently erased. The Manticore is less than 60 seconds away from total atomic vaporization. I reach up with my trembling, blood-soaked hand and press the manual recording toggle on my cracked helmet one last time. The physical pain is completely gone now. The crushing fear is gone. There is only the overwhelming, blinding light and the profound, beautiful silence slowly settling into my mind as the psychic connection to the Seraphim is finally severed. The ancient predators will not harvest humanity. The Earth defense grid will find my warring boy drifting in the cold dark, and they will know not to answer the call if the Cathedral ever broadcasts again. I am not a helpless passenger on a funeral ship anymore. I'm the burning sword locking the gates of Eden. This is Captain Arthur Vance of the deep space salvage vessel Manticore. The ancient contract is broken. End of final log.